Director of Marketing at Jet Systems. We're going to get started with this week's XMetaL 37 Minutes webinar. Our presenter today is Murray Smith, Director of Technical Services here at Jet Systems. Before we get right into it, a couple of things to note. The webinar will be recorded and posted onto the Partner Center. So if you want to revisit it at any time or have colleagues that may not be able to attend, you can certainly access the recording there. If you don't have access to the Partner Center, please feel free to contact either your channel rep or myself or Murray. We can help get you access. Other than that, we will be taking questions throughout the webinar. You can ask those using the QA panel in the WebEx interface. We'll be collecting those questions during the course of the webinar and then addressing them at the end. With that, I will turn it over to Murray.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, so today we're just going to talk about just some various bits of XMetaL Dialog programming. Just one announcement before we get started. The next 37-minute webinar will be done by Derek Reed, who looks after our technical support here. And what he's going to talk about is the Dialog toolkit deployment with XMetaL Author Enterprise 6.0. So he's going to talk. There's multiple versions of the toolkit on the system, and they get deployed to different places. So he's going to just explain how that all works and where you make your customizations in the toolkit and that sort of thing. All right. So first we're going to just cover on a few sort of little basic ideas for XMetaL Dialogs, just to get a little bit of background for everybody. So we'll talk about displaying a dialog from a menu button. We'll look at some of the built-in XMetaL dialogs. So using those is a real simple way to get to prompt user for some kind of action or information. And then lastly, we'll look a little bit about built-in dialog. And then we'll start to look at some more advanced features like passing objects from your macro code to the dialog, and then further look at a bit more advanced feature, which is some options for where your dialog code can live. Okay, so let me first set up some examples in XMetaL Author, and you'll be able to access these examples. They'll be made available to you to have a look at them. So this is going to be our first example, and it's just going to show some code for how to pop up a dialog. So just displaying a custom dialog. And this will be example 2, and this is going to look at some of the built-in dialogs in XMetaL Author. So just things like an alert, and that just displays a message and prompts the user to hit OK. A prompt which displays a text field. The user can type a response in and then hit OK or cancel. Confirm dialog. So again, this is similar to an alert, except that it gives the user an option of canceling or clicking OK. And then a notice dialog, another built-in dialog. Let's see, put a message up and put up to 3 those buttons. And then the last one is a message box. So the message box has a bunch of different things that you can do to it. It's sort of the most flexible of all of them. Okay, so let's just go back to the slides here. Okay, so the first thing we wanted to talk about was how do you display a dialog from a menu item. So what I'm showing you here is some script code that would be used to add a menu to the menu bar at the top of XMetaL Author. That's the first couple of lines of code here, and that adds a new menu bar, and the menu bar is going to be titled Example 1. So that's what you saw across the top of XMetaL Author. And then the code below that is adding the actual menu item for that first menu bar. And you can see the caption is called Run Example 1, so that's what's going to appear on the button. And then the bit that ties it into displaying the dialog is the on action. And so on action, the value given to it there, show example 1 dialog, that's the name of an XMetaL macro that gets loaded by XMetaL Author. So as soon as you when you click on that dialog, it basically will run that macro called show example 1. So here's the code for our example 1 macro, and all it does is builds up the path to where the XFT file is. So the XFT file is the file that contains all the code for your dialog. It defines the dialog, and you pass that path into an application method called createFormDialog. So it's a method of the application object that returns a dialog object, and you just call doModal on that. doModal is a blocking function, so the code is blocked at that line doModal until the user hits OK or cancel, or otherwise the dialog gets closed. And then the last line is just setting that dialog to null so that the JavaScript garbage collector will reflect that object and dispose of it. So it's pretty simple to create a menu item and tie it to a little bit of script. All right, now moving on to some of the built-in XMetaL dialogs. So again, these are really easy to use. And as I said before, there's an alert dialog, a prompt that gives the user an option to enter some text in a text field. Confirm, it's the same as alert, but it gives you the cancel button as an additional option. Notice box displays a message with up to 3 buttons, and the message box displays a message and a variety of different buttons and different icons. So you can have an OK button, you can have an OK cancel, abort, retry, ignore, yes or no. So a lot of people ask, can we use standard dialogues like an alert instead of having an OK, have a yes if that's more like the answer you want to have, or can the confirm dialog have a yes no option instead of OK cancel. So instead of using an alert or a confirm, you use a message box, and then you can set up those buttons to have that kind of response. And then lastly, you can specify what kind of icon you want displayed in that dialog. So whether it's a warning or just an info kind of thing, you can display the appropriate type of icon to go with the dialog. So as I said, these are pretty easy to use. So this page shows some script that would appear in your macro file. So application alert is really easy to run. It's easy to execute. There's an alert method on the application object. The application object is a global object that's available inside your script code. And you just pass in whatever method you want displayed. The example below that is the notice box. So this was the one that has the up to 3 buttons you can assign to that box, and where you can assign the text. So you can see that I'm going to have 3 buttons, and the text on the first is going to be apple, on the second is going to be orange, and on the third is going to be I don't like fruit. And then when that application notice box function returns, it returns the index number for the button that was clicked. So if you clicked on the apple button, then it will return 1, or if you clicked on the orange button, it would return 2. So then you can do whatever you need to do appropriately after that. All right. So the next thing is looking at how you build custom dialogues. So custom dialogues are built in the XMetaL form layout tool. A lot of people call it XF layout because that's the name of the executable that's just run when you open it. And that is part of the XMetaL developer product. So if you want to build your own custom dialogues, you do need to purchase XMetaL developer. Let's have a look here. So inside the XF layout tool, you can drag and drop different controls onto your dialog, and then after adding those controls to the form, then the next thing you need to do is add some behavior to the controls. So if you want clicking on this button, and you do that by writing some code for these different events. And so let's drop out of PowerPoint and go into the form layout tool. Okay, so let's just quickly create a new little form. So the first thing it does is ask you what kind of script you're going to write in your form. JScript or VBScript are both supported. I'll do mine in JScript. So creating a new form, you get a new blank layout. And we can just change the title of that form to test form, and let's throw a few controls onto it. Put a couple of buttons on, and get a couple of checkboxes. That's what we got here. Got this box. You can put all your different controls on there, and as I said, you can just drag them around and get them all laid out where you like. There. It's a little bit too big right now, so I'm just going to shrink it down a bit. Okay, and as I mentioned, so when you want to add some behavior to these controls, then you go over to the Events tab, and for example, let's set some behavior for this first check button, and let's imagine that we want it to be initialized to be checked when the dialog is first displayed. So that's pretty simple. So we just write the name of the control, and then we get a little prompt for different properties and functions that are available for that control as we type a little bit. So we're going to set the value to true. Save this form. And close this. So then, after we've created the form, we can run it just right from the layout tool here. So we run it and we see that when the dialog got created, our macro that gets executed when this button is first initialized got executed, and it set it to be checked. So we haven't added any other controls, any other behavior to the dialog or anything else. So clicking on things doesn't really do anything. But we can add behavior. We could make, for example, we could make this button into a special kind of a button. That's done by setting the type, and we could make that into the OK button, and we could make this into the cancel button. And all that does is it makes it so that when you click on that button, And the return value for the doModal function will indicate whether you clicked OK or whether you clicked Cancel. Right. A little bit of that for now. Go back to our slides. Okay, so we've kind of covered some really basic things, and of course there's a lot more to learn about programming dialogues in XMetaL Author, and there's a lot of information in the XMetaL Developer documentation, and you can actually get to that documentation from our website as well. If you look under the Support tab, I think you can find the technical documentation, and online there we've got the help for XMetaL Developer. And as well, we offer training in using XMetaL Developer. So let's move on to a couple of slightly more advanced topics, now that we've sort of got a little bit of an idea of the basics. So now let's look at passing objects to your dialog. So inside your script code, you may have JavaScript objects where you've stored various information that you need to pass up to the dialog so that it's available in the dialog, either because it's presenting that information in something like a list box or a pull-down menu, or just because you need it to determine how you're going to respond to someone clicking on the different controls in the dialog. So this is some script. Again, this is script that would be inside an MCR file, inside script file, and it does pretty much the same thing as we've done before. It's going to create the dialog, and then it's going to call doModal on it to display it. But we're just using a little bit, I guess, of a different approach to doing it. So now we're using this new ActiveX object to create the dialog object, and then we call a function on that XFT object called add top level object. And you can see that what I've done is I've created an array of names of different kinds of fruit, and I'm going to pass that array into my dialog because I'm going to display those values in the dialog. And let me just drop out of here for a second just to remind everyone what it looks like. So this is example 4. So what we're doing is we're passing in the values that are going to get displayed in the pull down the list. Okay, that's all we're doing. So here's our values in our array. So the first entry is fruits, that's going to apple, orange, peach, and pineapple. And we pass that into our dialog by calling the add top level object. And we give it a name as well. We'll get into where the name is used in just a minute. And then we pass the object as the second argument. We're also going to pass in another JavaScript object, which we're calling return val, and that's going to have what we're going to do is inside the dialog there's some code in there so that when you pick one of those menu items, it sets the return val to be the index in the array for the item that you selected. And then lastly, we pass the application object into the XFT dialog, call start form to create it and initialize it, and then finally call doModal to display it. So these add top level objects, so what's going to happen here is that inside our XFT dialog, we're going to be able to access these objects that we passed in, and we access them using that string that's the first argument in the add top level object function, and that's going to be the name of our object inside the dialog. So I'm just going to switch back to XF layout. Close this guy and open the menu. If you go over and look at the events, we've got our initialize method. And so here we've accessed that array by using the name that was passed in on the at top level object. And what we're doing in this little bit of code to initialize the combo box is we just loop through the array, grab all the strings out of it, and add them to the combo box. And then we set the selection to for the first item in the pull-down menu. And then over here in this other event, so every time that combo box gets pulled down and an item gets selected, this method gets invoked, and all we're doing is just grabbing the selection index and just setting that, passing that into this return value response, which is going to be checked after the dialog closes to see which thing you selected. Close that, I think. And let's go back to the slide. Okay, so one last note, thing to be aware of when you're using this approach to create your dialog and to pass objects in. Any of the objects that are normally available just as globals, if you create your dialog the other way, such as the application object, you need to make sure you explicitly pass them into the dialog in order to be able to access them. All right. So, given that we can pass JavaScript objects to the dialog, so sort of the next logical thing is, could we pass a JavaScript object that actually implements all the dialog behavior? And well, in fact, you can, and that's what we're going to do. What we're going to show in this last example. So, have a look at there's a couple of advantages of doing it this way. One is you probably noticed that when we were in the XF layout tool, that when we wanted to look at the code that's for each one of those events, you can only look at them individually. So if you write your code and as a JavaScript object in your macro file and pass that JavaScript object in, you can have all that code together, and it's sort of more, in some cases, it's kind of easier to look at all at once. And the next thing is that since the JavaScript object is actually instantiated in XMetaL Author script engine, so just to refresh people's memory in case they weren't aware of it, XMetaL Author has a couple of different script engines. So there's one that runs in XMetaL Author itself, and then the XFT forms, they run a different script engine. Script engine for the XFT forms doesn't have support for a debugger. The script engine running in XMetaL itself does have support for a debugger. So if you create your JavaScript object in XMetaL Author and then pass it into the XFT, you can actually add debugger statements to your script, and you can now access a debugger when you're running your XFT. And further, we'll see this in the example, but if you're passing XFT, the properties of those objects inside the debugger as well. So that saves you from having to, do what people usually do in XFT, which is write alerts that pop up on display the various values if you're debugging things and trying to figure out how things are working. So let's look at the code for this last example. So here's the macro show example 5 dialog. So again, this is creating the dialog. It's going to pass this object into it, which I've called the dialog handler, and this is our JavaScript object that's going to be responding to all these different events in the dialog. We pass that in, and then we just start the form and called zoom a little, just as we've done before and the last time. And here's a look at our JavaScript object. So the first thing is just the constructor for it. And all it does is again, the same kind of thing. Creates an array with the various different kinds of fruits listed in it. Sets the current selection to 0. So the first item is going to be selected. And then we've got a couple of methods that are going to be invoked by our dialog event. And so the first thing is initialize combo box, and it passes in the combo box object, and it does exactly the same thing as we did before inside the XFT. It loops through the items in the array and adds those strings to the combo box. And then in the next method, set selection is going to be invoked by the event for onClick or onSelected. Can't remember exactly which one it was. And it's going to do pretty much exactly the same thing. It's going to just record the current index of that selection. And then the last thing is an extra function that I added to be able to retrieve the current selection from this object after the dialog is closed. Let's go over now to the XFT and look at what it looks like on that side. So here's our example 5, and here is our same program list. And we look at the onInitialize, and now we don't have the code to loop through the array in this one. Instead, all we're doing is just invoking that method that's in our JavaScript object, passing in the combo. And then here's our onChange method, and it does the same thing. It calls the set selection method and passes in the index of the currently selected item in the combo box. So basically, when you're using this technique, all of your events basically boil down to then just single calls out to your JavaScript object to do whatever behavior you want. And so the dialog itself inside the XFT becomes really, really simple, and your code instead lives back in a macro file where you can kind of see it all together, and again, you have access to the debugger. So what I'm going to do now is shut down the XF layout tool. And I'm going to shut down XMetaL Author as well. So I want to show you what it looks like when you use the debugger here. So I'm just going to put a debugger statement in right here. And then I'll restart XMetaL Author so that it will reload that macro code. Okay, we run our example. First thing that happens is that the XFT makes a call over to that JavaScript object. It hits the debugger statement. We're going to open a debugger. And this will just take a minute. It's still just loading. Let's just do that. Okay, come on. Okay, so just finished loading. So now you can see that now we can step through our JavaScript code in the debugger, and we can do things like now. We can see this JavaScript object. One thing that we can't do here is we don't see all the internals of it, so you kind of need to know the values of the different properties. So we can see that the combo box selection is currently set to -1. Basically, it hasn't been initialized. It hasn't been set to any value yet at this point. And we can just step through our code. And we're just adding those strings. Combo box. And finally, we set the selection to 0 and then initialize everything. And we'll just let it go, and we see we're back to our dialog app. All right. Back to our slides. So again, the advantages are that you can kind of throw your script code together, and it's easier to view and access if you take this approach, and you get access to a debugger that you normally don't have access to from your code inside your XFT. And I guess there's kind of a disadvantage that we don't have quite as good of an encapsulation of all the code, so now it's spread between a little bit inside the XFT, which is making these calls out to the JavaScript object, and some of it is inside the macro, the MCR file. But for me, being able to access the debugger is usually a benefit that's significant enough that I don't mind that. All right, so these have just been a few little XMetaL dialogue odds and ends. So we looked at a few introductory things for people who aren't familiar with XMetaL Author dialogues, like how to launch it from a menu item, the different built-in dialogues that are available in XMetaL Author, and how you go about creating a custom dialogue. And then that led us on to a few more advanced topics, passing JavaScript objects into your dialogue, so you can pass any kind of information that you need inside your dialogue to add behavior or information into it. And then finally that lastly led on to a sort of an interesting approach for structuring your dialog script code that is available to you if you'd like to take advantage of it. And that brings us to the end.
Terrific. Thanks, Marie. So we don't have a lot of questions. One of them I think was addressed, but that was all the code that you're showing in JavaScript.
Yeah, all the code was that I wrote was in JavaScript. So the stuff that's in the MCR files, that's the stuff that you put inside, for example, the startup folder that gets loaded when XMetaL Author starts up. And since I created my XFT dialogues, and when I created them, I had that option of choosing between JavaScript or VBScript, and I chose JavaScript, so my script examples for the XFT were also in JavaScript.
Okay. And the other question pertains more to the download. One person's wondering if, in addition to the WebEx recording, if you'll be making the code samples available for download as well.
It'll be available to anyone who wants to.
Good. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. We have another 37-minute webinar coming up, so watch for the invitations for those. And as I said at the beginning, of course, this has been recorded and will be available on the